Specifically a family register, yes. Please don't say any more. Miss Chu's head might not stay attached to her shoulders, Chu said, although she didn't sound very worried. She was, however, taking care that there was no one else around. Might I ask that you dispose of this object you obtained as quickly as possible? Rikusen did not and would not forgive Jyaku-o, but neither did he intend to besmirch his memory. I'll have to ask my superiors. It would benefit everyone to get rid of that thing. What if it became public knowledge that the Empress's real father was some nobody from nowhere? Rikusen sensed that Chu already knew the truth. I know, it wouldn't be any fun at all. She still sounded unruffled, but her face was slightly more tense than before. She must be a very capable spy. Rikusen wondered if she might simply snuff him out, but he liked to think she wouldn't. If someone investigated the family register, it was possible that they might uncover Empress Jayuku's true father. One could see who her mother's previous husband had been, and even if he were dead, his family could be investigated. That would be no good at all. Miss Chu knows why this family register is bad news for her, but what makes you want to get rid of it, Mr. Rikusen? It's nothing special. If you make a deal with someone and then their secret is exposed, the deal becomes worthless, doesn't it? He wasn't doing this for Jyaku-o, the man who would have foolishly exposed the entire western region to danger. He held a great mass of inferiority toward Jyaku-en. There was one reason and one reason only that Rikusen wanted to destroy the family register, and that was because he felt a duty to Jyaku-en. Understood. I'll talk to my superiors about it. Chu handed Rikusen the change of clothes, and then she went off somewhere, disguise and all. It doesn't seem like she directly serves the Moon Prince, Rikusen mused, but he wouldn't pry any deeper. He now had a guilty conscience. Rikusen went back to his room and closed the door, then knelt down. He desperately wanted to change his bloodied clothes, but his body wouldn't move. I don't understand, it's supposed to be over. Tears began falling from his eyes. Ploop, 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 am I wrong? Is it only just beginning? He sniffled like a crying child. It was embarrassing as a grown adult, but at that moment he felt his mother and sister watching over him. What's more, for some reason, Lacan had covered for him. I didn't lie, but he should have known it wasn't the truth. It was an uncharacteristic thing for his former boss to do, he thought. His next thought was that he would go on. To protect the western lands he would live, he would continue to be the wind. Chapter 22, the Imperial younger brother's complaint. Even in a completely different part of the estate, Maomao could hear the women sobbing. From the second floor of the annex she could see the line out front. My, how awful, Chu said, as if it had nothing to do with her. They say funerals are supposed to be solemn, but they certainly make a spectacle of it here in the West. I think this is pretty solemn by their standards. Maomao stepped away from the window and looked at the grasses on the table. These were a selection of herbs she'd found that grew on the plains. Chu had picked them for her. She'd just been trying to organize and use everything when she received some disturbing news. Jyaku-o, it seemed, had been killed. She wondered what was up yesterday when only Jyaku-o's brothers and sisters had been at the ceremony and he hadn't appeared at all. They said he'd been murdered by a farmer who had repeatedly approached him for money. Maomao was half surprised to hear it, but the other half of her feelings included understanding, a strange relief and a certain amount of anxiety. A farmer, really, she asked. I think you already know, Miss Maomao, about how Master Jyaku-o could be a bit too charitable. That was a nice way of putting it, but what Chu meant was the way he lent out money. Fair point. Maomao thought the people receiving the loan should know the lender wasn't a god. She asked what were the conditions of the loan. She figured Chu, with her ample information, would know. You're right, it's exactly like you say. He didn't lend money unconditionally. He basically asked for their help in an emergency, but I don't think people could really picture an emergency. It might be different in the more westerly villages. There are no instances of the barbarian tribes attacking the western capital. Those problems seemed far away geographically. If nothing else, people certainly didn't expect war to break out in their lifetimes. That was what had led to the recent rebellion. Jyaku-o had appeared to cover for Jinshi while actually stirring up the people to war, but it ended up being what got him killed. I guess I can't say I don't sympathize. Maomao understood, at least somewhat, how the farmer who had killed Jyaku-o must have felt. People always thought things didn't concern them until the sparks drifted down on their own heads. The poorer one was, the less one could think about anything that wasn't right in front of their nose. But that narrow vision could also blind one with desire. Can I ask something? What happened with the killer? He was killed right back. But still, the farmer's family was informed before things became public. Chu helpfully explained what Maomao had actually wanted to know. If someone made an attempt on the life of an imperial family member, their entire family could be destroyed. And while Jiakuo wasn't a member of the imperial line, he was the older brother of Empress Jiaku and son of Jiakuan. Maomao and the others might not have a very favorable impression of him, but he had much support in the western capital. Even if the murderer was already dead himself, the murderer's family could still be in danger. Do you think the family was able to get away? Miss Chu wouldn't know. I can tell you that mob justice is against the law in the western capital, but if they didn't get out of here, they could be in some trouble. The act might be illegal, but it was impossible to know how effective the law would actually be at restraining people. The uprising had come knocking at the door of the annex where the imperial younger brother was staying. The people were clearly not in their right minds. Anything else you want to ask, Miss Maomao? Chu sat in her chair with an indolent smile on her face. Maomao sat too with a half-withered medicinal herb in her hands. She planned to pick the leaves off the branches and dry them. Was it really a farmer who killed him? She thought about asking the question outright, then stopped herself. Instead she said, what's going to happen next? He was the acting regional governor after all. He was handling a lot of work. Yes, about that. Chu picked up a branch to help. She could be a bit carefree, but she was also a capable lady-in-waiting. Now she mimicked what Maomao was doing, dexterously plucking leaves off the branch. Last year, well, for about a year now, I guess Mr. Rikusen has been taking care of a lot of the work. It will go with what he was already doing as aide, and with one little exception there should be no problem at all. Why do I have a feeling that little exception is crucial? Because it is. There's no one to serve as the face of the operation. That is bad news, bad news. Maomao understood, but at the same time she had a question. Given the actual work involved, it makes sense for Mr. Rikusen to do it, but he does come from the central region, Chu said. His response to the insect swarm had amply demonstrated his ability to lead, but he wasn't powerful enough to be Jiakuo's successor. Master Jiakuan has lots of kids, right? Master Jiakuo's younger brothers and sisters. There was Dahai, was it? Who runs the port? Maomao ventured. Right, yes, there's him. Jiakuo has 6 younger brothers alone, not to mention a son of his own, although his brothers and sisters would probably be first in line. Can't one of them do it? Well, the thing is, Chu sounded like she didn't quite want to say. They all have specialized jobs, you see, specialized jobs. Like what? Like boats or pottery. There are lots of craftsmen in that family. No matter how competent he is, a farmer like Lahan's brother would never be able to rule a nation, right? Maomao tried to imagine Lahan's brother doing desk work instead of tossing a hoe over his shoulder. He could probably manage it, she figured, but he would also be 10 times more effective out in the fields. Not to mention, those who stood at the very top couldn't be merely ordinary. Even the most exceptional could expect to be replaced if they made a single mistake. I'm thinking he could have afforded one more person with good political sense, Maomao said. He probably just didn't want anyone to fight with his eldest son. And if you think about it, Empress Jiakuo actually rose highest in the world politically speaking. It sounds like Master Jiakuo's son hasn't had much training yet. They figured, why rush while his father was alive? I guess that makes a certain kind of sense. You couldn't go much higher in the world than forging a marriage connection with the emperor. Jiakuan, a merchant, had succeeded in becoming His Majesty's father-in-law, but that left them back at square one. Who was going to lead the western capital? I guess we can't expect Master Jiakuan to come back to the western capital at this point, Maomao said. In his position, it would be tricky. Even if it is his true son who died, I don't think it would bring him back to the western capital now. I think there's going to be some pretty uncomfortable conversations for the Moon Prince after the funeral. You can't avoid the question of whether it was really a farmer from the western capital who did it. How kind of her. This was precisely the subject in which Maomao was keenly interested. Jiakuo had been a thorn in Jinchi's side with all his talk of war, true enough, but he was an even bigger thorn now that he had gone and died. There's a few other bigwig types around, right? Can't they do something about this? Oh, Miss Chu couldn't possibly tell you, but there is one thing I know for certain. She leaned in very close to Maomao. Why, yes. What? Maomao asked, somewhat cowed. No matter what the outcome, the Moon Prince will come home very tired. This calls for a medicinal brew that will whisk away the fatigue, ideally something not too bitter. I'll see what I can do, Maomao mumbled. She plucked some more leaves and wondered whether the quack had eaten through all of the honey they'd brought. True to Chu's prediction, Jinchi was profoundly tired the next day. It was so bad that even the quack, who could usually be readily tricked into concluding his examination without comment, began to worry that the Moon Prince might be ill. "I'm just tired, that's all. You can go," Jinchi snapped, and the quack shuffled out dejectedly. Maomao, however, remained. "Well, this is awkward." It was the first time they'd really seen each other since his little charging episode. Jinchi was clearly exhausted, and Maomao wondered what could have happened. His usual entourage seemed to share his weariness as if under a collective cloud. She wondered what tiring tale he had told them. "You can go ahead and sit down," Jinchi said, so Maomao sat. She had already given the draft she created to Suken. "Ask me what happened." "What happened, sir?" Maomao asked obediently. "You'll never believe it." Maomao reflected that it had been quite a while since Jinchi had looked so spent in front of his retainers. Sometimes he got like this when only Geishan was around, but this was different. With Suken, Taomei, Chu and Basin present, not to mention, Baryu was probably out of sight somewhere nearby. Jinchi flaunted his listlessness in front of all of them. Maomao might have expected Suken or Taomei to scold him, but no reprimands came. It showed just how justifiable his listlessness was. Suken set the medicine gently in front of Jinchi. It was closer to a broth, actually. Maomao had settled on a sort of soup, because trying too hard to mask bitterness with sweetness could result in a just plain weird flavor. She put vegetables and medicinal herbs into the pot, ingredients that helped with fatigue. She stewed it with plenty of milk and butter until the sinewy meat was soft enough to chew easily. To be perfectly honest, many of the ingredients were rather crude for an imperial palate, but Maomao had at least tried to pick the most effective ones. The broth was green because it was still medicine, but it should taste all right. Quack, Chu and Lahaku had all given it their stamp of approval. MMMHH. Jinchi took a mouthful of soup and then let out a breath. He was taking his time, considering he had begged her to listen to him. The important thing was that the soup seemed to agree with him. He went back for another spoonful, and then another, trying all the different ingredients. "I guess he's just that hungry," Maomao thought. Once he'd had a mouthful, it seemed like he couldn't stop, and he ate everything. He wiped his glistening lips with the back of his hand. It wasn't very princely behavior, but it was appropriate for a young man his age. The next moment he suddenly looked ready. He straightened up and didn't seem so tired anymore. "Talk about quick changes. We discussed who would be the leader of the Western region going forward, but it was a lot of going in circles, as we expected," he said. "I should imagine, sir," Maomao replied with a quick glance at Taomei. If it had been just Suhen or Chu there, that would be one thing, but Taomei's eyes scared her. She had to act somewhat formal and distant, because she could never be quite sure what aspect of her attitude Taomei might take to be disrespectful. Sir Jayukyuan's other sons unanimously rejected the idea of stepping forward themselves. They each excel in his own field, but none is suited to politics. That goes for all of them. Meanwhile, Sir Jayukyuo's child isn't yet studied enough in politics, or so I'm told. He is not powerful enough to suddenly assign him acting governor. Jinchi sounded emphatic. His fists were clenched, so we considered Sir Jayukyuo's aides. They are competent enough at their jobs, but none of them had the mettle to stand at the top. I suppose they are the kind of people who are more comfortable assisting. Right, sometimes that is just how people were. Not everyone longed to rise relentlessly in the world. There were those who did not need a high station, so long as they had enough to eat. It seemed all of Jayukyuo's aides had possessed this disposition. Did he go out of his way to surround himself with people like that, or did they just gravitate toward him? If someone wanted a little bit of prestige but did not want to have to stand at the very top, they might be happier as an aide. Even if the ones who were too diligent could get too invested in their work and end up with stomach problems. We asked around among the most important and influential people in the Western capital, but the answer was always no. From a mercantile perspective, the disadvantages seem to outweigh the gains. They're very much a merchant people, aren't they, sir? Yes, that's how this town works. It's all well and good if someone has as much power as Sir Jayukyuan did, but the other merchants are all about as powerful as each other. Maomao didn't know how many influential merchants there were in the Western capital, but if one put himself forward too eagerly, he might well be crushed by the others. Besides, everyone had their hands full dealing with the fallout from the swarm, and it was hard to blame them if they didn't want to take on more work. I thought there was one person who might fit the bill. Jinchi said. Yes, who was that? Rikyusen. Yes, Maomao realized of course Jinchi would think of him. His name had even occurred to her after all. Above all, Chu would certainly have given a full report. You seem oddly accepting of that idea, Jinchi said, looking mildly annoyed. Better get out ahead of this before he remembers the whole marriage proposal business and it turns silly. Sir, when the swarm came, I saw him stay completely calm and take action. Besides, he has the guts to survive as the freak's right-hand man, doesn't he? Objectively speaking, he was highly capable. Yes, Miss Chu agrees with this, Chu said, her hand shooting into the air. A pair of predatory eyes gleamed to one side. Yes, well, he excused himself on the grounds that he had been sent here on behalf of the central government. Figures. Given that Rikusen had come from the central region, it would be best if he didn't stick his neck out too far. It was all just as Chu had said. If he was from the western capital himself, maybe things would be different. HRM, Maomao said. Something about her own thought nagged at her, but she assumed it was just her imagination and ignored it. In fact, Rikusen said that I should lead this place. He what? Maomao exclaimed. Even she couldn't keep herself from jumping out of her seat and talking at the top of her lungs. The predatory eyes now lighted on Maomao. She lowered herself back into her chair, feeling a tad queasy. What do you suppose he was thinking, sir? She asked with studied politeness. Exactly what he said, I suspect. Daily business could continue as normal, with the aides handling everything. But he thought I should remain as the face. Curse that man, Rikusen. Yikes, no wonder he was so tired. He seemed to be emphasizing his main point. But if he came here on behalf of someone, I am nothing more than a visitor. Am I wrong? Jinchi asked, looking to her. No, sir. By all rights, I could be back in the capital by now, couldn't I? Why does everyone simply stand around and look at me? Of course, sir. She remembered him saying that this trip would be 3 months at the shortest. But he never said how long it might be at the longest. How many months has it been now? Maomao counted on her fingers. More than 5 months they had spent in the western capital. Including the boat trip to get here, it had been more than half a year since they'd left the royal capital. Frankly, she wished Gyuku-O had had the good grace to be more mindful when he got killed. Not that she was glad he was dead, but couldn't he have waited to kick the bucket until after he had resolved the misunderstandings about Jinchi, about the imperial younger brother? He had only fired the people up for war. How much trouble could one old man cause? Then again, what would have happened if he had survived? If a man with so much influence in the region had really pressed for war, even Jinchi, an imperial family member, could only have resisted him for so long. It might have been possible to at least avoid actual war with Sheo, but Master J. Jinchi, Maomao said, using his name with some hesitation. The predator's eyes were terrifying. You intended to remain regardless, right? Jinchi didn't say anything, meaning it was true. If he had really found it so unbearable, he could easily have just gone back home the moment the swarm hit. Considering his position, nobody could or would have complained. In fact, he would no doubt have received a letter or two encouraging him to do just that. But that would have left the people ragged in body and soul from the swarm, with the foreign tribes attacking and no one to lead and guide them. Even in a deeply unpleasant situation, Jinchi was using his head. We can't just leave the western capital like this, can we? Maomao asked. You are absolutely right. Jinchi heaved a sigh. He looked tired again and he was taking little glances at Maomao. What is it, sir? Under the present circumstances, I think that it would be safest to return to the central region. Safest for whom to return, Maomao wondered, but then she realized he meant her. I suppose it would be, she allowed. He might have sent her away for her nominal safety, but she had still ended up swarmed by grasshoppers. Then an insurrection had come right to her doorstep. But this was a mistake here. You can't tell me to go home, sir, not now. I guarantee you lose your freak strategist too. She drove the point home. I would love to go home. God, how I would, she would carry on. She had to write letters to the Madam and Yao and NN. If we ask ourselves how much of a loss the freak strategist really is to the central authority, I think the honest answer is, not very much. He is probably more useful to them here, don't you think, even if he can make life a little noisy, and he has a shogi companion and everything. But if you want to send me off to wherever, well, if I am just a pawn who makes no difference to the strategic situation, I guess I have no right to object. Am I a pawn to you, Master Jinchi? He was silent. Is there something you would like to say to me? Yes, I want to. He started to answer but refused to look her in the eye. Finally he said, I want to have another bowl of that stew. Sure, Maomao said after a second. I will go get some more. Apparently she figured this was his way of saying that she was useful enough to keep around. She hoped the quack doctor hadn't eaten the rest of the stew as a midnight snack. She had a naughty little thought that maybe she should have put a sign on it for imperial use only. Epilogue as you will, that was the entirety of the letter to Rikyusen. He thought of the red-haired girl Gyukyuan's youngest child was the daughter of an attractive traveling performer. She was raised with the intention of one day going to the central region. She had harbored the survivors of the Yi clan. He was sure that Haku-yu and her sisters had also been saved by the girl whose smile never faltered. Just as Gyukyuan had predicted, you grew up beautiful. He changed her name to Gyukayu. He sent her to the Ria Palace and she rose to become empress. Gyukuo had sought to follow in the footsteps of his father Gyukyuan, in whatever form that took. Though she did it in her own way, Gyukayu was the same. What Gyukyuan valued more than anything was the protection of the western capital. Gyukuo had sought to make it flourish, while Gyukayu had worked to ingratiate herself with the central authority. The trio whom Rikyusen had once treated as little sisters had also grown up beautiful. He only saw them again after Gyukayu had become empress.